I was part of the Rwandese Patriotic Front that was fighting for Rwanda's transformation and liberation from the dictatorial regime that was in place there. So I was following what was happening and also trying to explain to people in the US what this struggle was all about.
Hey everybody, I'm Jamie White, founder of finishing-strong.org. I want to thank you for joining us for another podcast. Finishing Strong is dedicated to helping people who are transitioning from working full-time to something else and helping them discover how to live their next season with purpose. Through our website, finishing-strong.org, we provide resources to help guide people in a process to evaluate their gifts, talents, and passions, and to redefine their purpose. Today, I am so excited to have Ambassador Charles Murigande from Rwanda on our podcast. Many of you are probably not aware that today, April 7th, is Genocide Against the Tutsi Memorial Day in Rwanda. It's called Kwibaka, or Remembrance. Ambassador Murigande has a fascinating story to share with you today about his early life as a refugee, his formal education in Europe, his work in the US, and where he was when genocide began. Then the incredible leadership roles he had in the country from 1994 until his retirement in 2020. If you're like me, you see a podcast that's going to last for over an hour and go, I don't think I have time, but please take the time to listen to this one. This faithful, humble man truly has one of the most interesting stories you have ever heard. He has done so much in his life that I would wear you out with his full bio. Instead, see his Wikipedia link in our show notes. But as a quick teaser, he was one of the key leaders to help restore Rwanda after the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. He's held roles such as advisor to the president on foreign affairs, minister of transportation and communications, president of Rwanda University System, secretary general of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, and ambassador to Japan. And then after all of that, you're going to hear how he is spending his time in what we call retirement, using his gifts and his talents in so many ways to build relationships, community, and he still continues to share his faith wherever he goes. Join me in welcoming Ambassador Murigande. We're joined today by Ambassador Murigande from Rwanda. And he and I have gotten to know each other over the past 6 months and invited him to be a guest on the podcast. I invited him because despite the fact of all the things that he's done in his life, what I see most is that you're finishing strong, right? That's what I've enjoyed seeing in you in the time that we spent together last fall. So first of all, thank you for spending time with us today, Ambassador.
I am most welcome, Jamie, for inviting me to your podcast.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. A lot of people who are listening to this, especially those in Rwanda, know you very well. You've been a leader of that country for decades, and people know your story and they know who you are. But there'll be a lot of people today who don't know you and don't know your story. So why don't you take me a little bit from the early 60s? Your family, like so many families that I've met over there, left Rwanda in the early 60s as a result of the first genocide against Tutsis, as I recall. Tell me about that. Tell me what happened with your family and what was going on in the early 60s.
Yeah, I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to share my life story with the listeners. As you just mentioned, my parents were forced to leave Rwanda in 1960 because of the civil strife that was unfolding at that time. Rwanda was still a colonized country, but some Rwandans, educated Rwandans, have started agitating themselves for independence. And the colonial power, Belgium, in an effort to foil their efforts to get independence, identified these people who were agitating as Tutsis because they were predominantly Tutsis, and then mobilized another part of the Rwandan population, the Hutus, to burn their houses, kill them, and it was during that chaos that my parents were forced to go into exile in Burundi. I was then 2 years old, and basically I grew up in Burundi as a refugee. In Burundi, we lived in several refugee camps. We started with a temporary refugee camp in Huye, just near the border with Rwanda. But of course, because of international conventions on refugees, that camp was dismantled, and we were taken very far from the borders of Rwanda. We lived in another refugee camp called Kigamba, and then my parents also moved to another refugee camp called Lushia. So I did my primary education in the refugee camps, and then when I finished my primary education, luckily enough, some older refugees who had had an opportunity to study had decided to create a school for the education of their younger brothers and sisters, because then in Burundi, as was the case in many other countries, there were very few schools, and of course, logically, these very few schools were just reserved for the nationals. So refugees had a lot of difficulties to be admitted in secondary schools. That's why our elder brothers and sisters decided to create a school, and that gave some of us an opportunity to pursue secondary education. When I finished my secondary education, I was lucky to get a scholarship from an organization that was based in Switzerland, that allowed me to go to University of Burundi. And I did 2 years at that university, and then got another scholarship to go to study in Belgium. That's where I finished my bachelor degree, master's, and PhD in mathematics. When I finished my PhD, I came back to Burundi and worked there for 2 years, but life for refugees had become a bit difficult. I started exploring the possibility of going elsewhere to work. I eventually got an opportunity to go to the United States and worked in the United States for about 6 years, from 1989 to 1994. Then in 1994, our country experienced a traumatic, devastating genocide. The force that stopped the genocide, the Rwandese Patriotic Front, with its armed wing, Rwandese Patriotic Army, called on all of us to come and help in the rebuilding of the country, because the country was completely destroyed. Many people had died. 1 million people perished in 3 months. And even the war to stop that genocide destroyed properties, and even the forces that organized the genocide rooted everything that they could possibly root, and even destroyed those they could not flee with. So I felt compelled to come and give my contribution to the rebuilding of my country.
Let me pause you there a second. Those are, I mean, one, it's just such an incredible story that a young boy raised in a refugee camp goes on, and you said it as you always do, very humbly. I got my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD. This is a boy that came out of a refugee camp, and yet you're getting the highest level of education. We're because we're at the beginning of Genocide Memorial commemoration. We're going to come back to that, because I think that's a fascinating story that so many people don't know a lot about. But I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Who influenced you as a boy in those studies? You got a PhD in mathematics, is that right? I mean, that's just incredible. That's a very difficult degree. What were your influences as a child that promoted your education?
First of all, I think my parents were not educated.
Wow.
But they appreciated the value of education. I remember my father once had a job of a watchman, but he was doing it very well. And then the person he was serving said, "It's unfortunate that you have not been educated. If you had some level of education, I would have promoted you to other responsibilities." And that pushed him to push us to go as far as possible. And also my mother was like that. She would always ask us why we are not top of our class. If we happen not to be top, she would say, what have you lacked to be second or third? Are you hungry? Are you naked? No? We are giving it all to provide you with the minimum you need, so that you can study and excel. I think my parents were the prime motivators for me to go all the way.
Mm.
I would say, and then of course, as I moved on in my schooling, I remember when I was in the second year of secondary school, a professor or a teacher of mathematics gave us a very difficult problem to solve, and everybody would fail to solve that problem, and I managed to solve it. And then that teacher told me that, you know, I believe you can go all the way. I think in terms of mathematics and mathematics education, the sky will be the limit. Such words encouraged me to go all the way.
Wow, that's fascinating. Have you ever had a chance to go back to that person as an adult and speak with them?
Unfortunately, he's no longer alive.
Yeah.
We never met again. I mean, I kept meeting him when I was still a student at the university, but when I finished my studies in the university, he was no longer alive.
Okay. So you came to the United States. Where did you work in the United States, and what were you doing?
I got a postdoctoral training at Howard University in Washington, D.C. For like a year, and then I got a proper job there as a biostatistician in the Department of Biostatistics of the College of Medicine. Later on, I eventually became the director of the biostatistics department. Before I left to come back to Rwanda, I was the director of that biostatistics unit.
Oh, wow. So leading up to April of 1994, did you have relationships with the people in Uganda? Were you able to maintain relationships with Rwandese to know that, hey, we've got something that might be happening here? Were you involved with any of the pre-genocide activities?
Yes, I was. I was part of the Rwandese Patriotic Front that was fighting for Rwanda's transformation and liberation from the dictatorial regime that was in place there. So I was following what was happening, and also trying to explain to people in the US what this struggle was all about. So I maintained contact with the leadership of the Rwandese Patriotic Front, and was actually the spokesperson of Rwandese Patriotic Front in the United States.
Okay. Wow. So take us to whether it's the evening of April 6th, the president's plane is shot down, and as they say, all hell breaks loose. Where were you? When did you first find out this was going on?
Oh, because Rwanda is ahead of US time-wise.
Yeah.
When this happened in Rwanda, it was 8:30 p.m. But it was a bit early in the afternoon in the United States. By 6 p.m., the news was almost on all radio, media, So I remember I had a dinner with a Burundian friend who was working for the World Bank.
Mhm.
And that evening, we were almost unable to enjoy the dinner because we knew what was going to follow the death of President Habyarimana. And indeed, immediately, the government mobilized the militias, the army, and they started erecting roadblocks and going from house to house, killing Tutsis. They used that excuse to implement a genocidal plan they had all along developed. I would say for the next 100 days, it was difficult for all of us to be able to sleep. Actually, we were crying all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you still have family that was in Rwanda and friends?
Oh, yes. My immediate family, my parents and brothers and sisters were outside Rwanda, but we had uncles, we had aunts, we had cousins,
Mhm.
and many of them perished in the genocide.
I'm so sorry.
Mm.
So during the 100 days, were you able to provide help from where you were? And then would be the first part of the question. And when were you able to get back to Rwanda?
Yeah. During that time, we tried to explain, for many outsiders, especially in a place like the US, they were unable to understand really what was happening. And so I almost stopped working, although not officially, and consecrated all my time to going around, giving information about what was happening. And at one time, my wife decided not to sit there in Washington, D.C. and just cry. She asked herself a very pertinent question. She said, if Jesus was in my place, what would he do? Would he sit down and cry and pray, or would he try to do something? Obviously, the answer was that Jesus would try to do something. Then she said, can you pay me a ticket and send me to Rwanda so that I can move behind the front line and contribute to helping the orphans and the unaccompanied children. So she left while the genocide was still unfolding, and I stayed there in Washington, also doing that work I was talking about. So we did not sit and just cry, and we tried to do something.
Wow, what a heart and a compassion that the two of you had. So when were you able to finally get to Rwanda?
Yeah, when the government of national unity was set in place in July 19, on July 19, 1994, as I said, that government made an appeal to all of us. I felt I should come, but of course that was a decision I wouldn't be able to take alone, because I had to discuss it with my wife. I tried to get access to her, and eventually I was able to talk to her, and she said, you know, Charles, we have no business in Washington. Our place should be here. We must come and suffer with our people. With that green light from my wife, I started the process of leaving Howard University. I resigned my position, but offered to work 2 weeks to help find a replacement for my position. And by August 21st, I had gotten a replacement, and I left Washington, D.C. On that day, and arrived here on August 23rd, here in Rwanda. So just 1 month after the genocide was stopped.
So we had the 100 days that took place, and Rwandans know the statistics, but for those people who aren't as familiar with that 100 days, can you summarize what happened in the country, and then we'll talk about what you arrived to. But what took place in that 100 days?
Yeah, in that 100 days, I would say that the only work that the Rwandans did were, for those who were being hunted down, they were trying to hide. And the hunters, those who were hunting them and killing them. Every other work had stopped. So in just 100 days, they killed about 1 million Rwandans, mainly Tutsis, and even Hutus who would try to oppose and would not be as active as the killers were, would not survive. The fight to stop it displaced also almost everybody. By the end of July 1994, every Rwandan was a displaced person. Some went beyond the borders and became refugees, and actually we produced an exodus of biblical proportion, because more than 3 million Rwandans end up becoming refugees by the end of the 100-day period.
Wow.
As I said, the economy had ground to a halt. Banks had been looted. All the banks had been looted. There was not a single hospital, health center which was functional. The schools had closed. So we had a country that was completely destroyed. By the way, for the sake of the listeners, 1 million people dead out of 7.5 million people is like you lose in the US, where you have 330 million. It is like losing more than 50 million of Americans, because we lost 14% of our population. Imagine 14% of 330 million being killed in 100 days.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you land in the plane, or however you got into Rwanda. You arrive in the country. What happened then? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? What happened with your life then? Take me through those first couple of weeks of arrival.
Yeah. First of all, there was no commercial flights landing in Rwanda. So I flew to Entebbe
Mm-hmm.
and then came by vehicle. And actually, I arrived at night because my wife, as I explained, had been in Rwanda. Of course, I left the US when she had come back to pack up. She had told me where my parents had settled. My parents, meanwhile, had come back from Burundi and settled in a place called Rwamagana. So I went straight to Rwamagana and arrived there around midnight. And I slept there, and the following day I went back to Kigali. I say I went back to Kigali because I had crossed Kigali at night because I did not know where to find people I knew in Kigali. So I went there during the day, and I knew some people who had visited Washington during the armed struggle, who had interacted with me. So I went looking for them and ended up staying with one of the person who used to visit Washington, D.C. during the struggle. And after 2 or 3 days, I was given a job to be an advisor to the president on foreign affairs.
That's a pretty big job for your first job in the government there. But so that was the president before President Kagame, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. His name is Pastor Bizimungu.
Right.
He served as president from 1994 to 2000.
Okay. So describe some of those first meetings. One of the things that the world that knows anything about Rwanda is regularly comments on is how Rwanda came together. It's beyond our comprehension how a country that was so divided was able to come back together, and really in an incredibly short time. I know it didn't seem like a short time when you were over there in those first few years, but what were some of those meetings like? What did those meetings look like in the messaging of let's come together first start?
Yeah, to really understand how Rwanda came together, one needs to understand the Rwandese Patriotic Front. When it was created, the first objective was to bring together the Rwandan people. Unity was our number one political objective, because we had realized that really what was destroying our country, forcing some of the people to become refugees as we were, and others to become second-class citizens in their own country, was that politics of division, politics of hatred, and our first objective was to rebuild the unity that was characterized Rwanda. You know, Rwanda, unlike many other African countries, was not a creation of the Berlin Conference. If anything, the Berlin Conference chopped out some portion of Rwanda, but the Kingdom of Rwanda was a very well-known, recognized kingdom, very well administered and very well respected in the region. So we set out to recreate that sense of commonness and that sense of unity, that sense of sharing the same destiny. That is why, even after experiencing a terrible disaster such as the genocide, in our internal discussion as political organization, the RPF decided that we should never be taken away from our resolve to build the unity of our people. That's why, though the RPF had won the war, had defeated the genocidal government, naturally, the natural temptation would be the winner takes it all. But we invited all political parties to come together with us, and we established a broad-based government, and we called it Government of National Unity. And secondly, we also determined that we should fight any tendency for revenge. Even though we had people who had arms, who had lost their entire families, they knew very well if they were to be involved in revenge killing, they would also be sentenced to death. So that resolve is really what has eventually produced the unbelievable transformation people see in Rwanda. So in our meetings, we would always remind ourselves that we are here to build a united country. Anything we approached, even when we approached the issue of justice, we said we cannot have a retributive justice in this country. Otherwise, we end up killing hundreds of thousands of people because we had hundreds of thousands of criminals. How can we, even though it would have gone through justice, how can we kill such a number of people? And we even took an unbelievable decision of removing capital punishment in our laws. When other people would think, those who would not have capital punishment after a genocide would rather bring it in their laws. We said, no, we shouldn't be even tempted to apply that law that provides for capital punishment. Because we said, if we were to be engaged in those politics of division, take the power for ourselves, exclude others, practice revenge killing, then we wouldn't have any country called Rwanda. We would be finishing it off instead of rebuilding it.
That took some incredible leadership from the group. And I know you say that's the kind of the mantra of RPF, but that took some strong leadership. Describe the culture of leadership that was at the table with you, that was able to convince the people to follow that type of a forgiving what lies behind and moving for what's ahead. Describe the leadership that you saw, that you were a part of.
Yeah, I would say that really Rwanda had the blessing from God of having a person like our current president, Paul Kagame. Most of those decisions that we collectively took, I think if he had not been present in all our discussions to continue to focus us on why RPF was in the first place created, and not be diverted by the challenges we are meeting on our journey, rather focus on the goal, the vision, probably we wouldn't be where we are. So I remember one meeting we're having, discussing the issue of people who were living in other people's houses. Because when we came back, when refugees came back to Rwanda, all the case refugees, they found other refugees who had, they found people had left their houses, and so we wouldn't come and spend our night outside when there were vacant houses. So then came time when these refugees were coming back. Some people started resisting leaving the houses they were occupying, saying that, my parents were also forced out and left houses. But I remember our president, telling us that, no, you can't just exalt injustice because you have suffered injustice. And actually, that is really violating people's rights. It's like we would be stepping on an explosive, a mine. And I can tell you that a person would explode more violently than a TNT. So therefore, I beg you to understand that all of you who are staying in the houses that do not belong to you should leave those houses. As soon as the rightful owner comes, you should leave. And actually, I would even advise you to leave before even they come back. Start finding your own place to live. So it is that kind of leadership that has really helped us to foster reconciliation and create a united country.
It is it's just incredible to hear and to understand, and now so many decades later to see the impact and how the country has come together. And so, one, I'm hopeful. There's so many things I want to ask you, and so many things I want you to unpack. So, but for the sake of time, let's just summarize from the country came together. You had, in addition to being an advisor to the president on foreign affairs, you had a number of different jobs over your career. Can you just describe those different roles that you had representing the new leadership of Rwanda?
Yeah, I started, as I said, with the job of an advisor to the president, and then a year later I was appointed Minister of Transport and Communication. I stayed in that position for about 16 months or 19 months actually, then became the Vice Chancellor or President of our National University. After 1 year and a few months, I was elected the Secretary General of the Rwandese Patriotic Front, which is the ruling party in Rwanda. And I served in that position for 5 years, and then was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs, served in that position for close to 6 years, became the Minister of Cabinet Affairs for 1 year and 2-3 months, then became the Minister of Education for close to 2 years, and then I became Ambassador of Rwanda to Japan and served there for 4 years. When I came back, I became the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Institutional Advancement of the University of Rwanda. That was in 2016. In 2013, the government had taken a decision of putting together, merging all public universities into one university, creating a system like the California university system. So I served as the Deputy Vice Chancellor of that university. And then I retired in June 2020.
So to June 2020, and your retirement doesn't look like a lot of other people's retirement. You are a very busy and active man. So can you describe what this season, and I'm not even going to call it retirement because I know you're so busy, you're serving in so many areas, but what has this season looked like for you, transitioning from working full-time at the university to a variety of things? What are you doing now?
Yeah, first of all, when I retired, it wasn't because I had reached the retirement age, but I felt a bit exhausted and needed some rest and replenishment. So I did not rush into looking for anything else to do. I decided that I would rather focus on my relationship with people. I had grown up as a loving and caring person, loving people, but because of the nature of the work I did and the demands on me as in my different portfolios, I had kind of become an antisocial person, and I said, for my retirement, I'm going to recover my social part of me.
There you go.
So I have been spending most of my time visiting people, friends, parents, relatives, but also I said this gives me an opportunity to be more involved in my church and Christian organization that I have been part of. So therefore, really, that's what I do most. I'm much more involved in my church. When I came from the US and was given an opportunity to serve in the leadership of Rwanda, I felt like it was a deployment from God. And I said, some of my colleagues would probably not go to church, even if I invited them there. Maybe it would be good to create another avenue that is neutral, where they would feel safe to be convened to. And we started a prayer breakfast for leaders in 1995, in September 1995. And we've been meeting since then every week as a group of people involved in that ministry. And then for the broader ministry, we organize a prayer breakfast every month, whereby we invite people in the cabinet, in the parliament, in the judiciary, in the security forces, and even in the private sector and civil society. We come together and try to explore what God tells us about leadership, what kind of leadership God wants us to impart on Rwanda, to exercise in Rwanda. So we have a motto that says instilling godly values in leadership. So I have more time to be involved in that ministry now. I will take time to read books, and also people who want to pick my brain on any other subject, I am more available than I would be if I was still having a full-time job.
Well, consider me one of those people who want to pick your brain on a lot of different subjects. So I appreciate that. So you were you were in our first group for Finishing Strong in Kigali that we had in October, November. I think it was last day of October, first day of November, last fall. And you truly, Ambassador, are living with purpose. What would you say how would you encourage men and women who are at this season of beginning that transition from working full-time to something else? The impact of Finishing Strong had on you to be able to define your purpose, but how would you encourage people at this season of their life? If we hold another one, that'd be great, but how would you encourage folks?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for taking your time and your resources to come and run that training or workshop for us. If you recall, I think during the workshop I intervened and said, I wish I had attended such workshop long before my retirement.
Yeah.
I would have been probably better prepared, because I think many of us jump into retirement without preparation. We live our life, and all of a sudden you've reached 65 and you are automatically retired. I found the workshop really extremely interesting and useful for preparing people to retirement. when you go into retirement, all of a sudden you are cut off from your usual work community, and the activities that were related to your work are no longer there. You need to have reflected on what you will do, what will replace that passion of work, because it won't be there. So you need to have strategically thought about what you are going to be doing with your time. And even the resources you are getting, because you are getting a salary, the pension might be as big as your salary. Usually it is much less than your salary. If you have not adjusted to that along the way, you might be hit by that lack of resources.
Yeah.
So I really found the workshop on finishing strong and living with purpose, even in retirement, a very interesting workshop. And if it was to be organized in Rwanda, I would encourage people, especially people who are in their 50s. Those who are in retirement, yes, it is helpful, but some of the wrong choices you made in the past might not be redressed. But preparing it for your retirement is very, very important. So for those who are listening in to this conversation, if you get an opportunity to attend Finishing Strong workshop, please do it. It will be very helpful.
Well, that means a lot coming from you. I appreciate that that endorsement, and thank you so much for your time here. You know, we believe we'll be airing this on the first day of commemoration, this Friday, the 7th. And just maybe as we wrap up, tell us or give us some guidance around how we can join Rwandans in the commemoration. What's a way that some of us who are just so far away from the country physically, but also maybe even from the events, how can we join the people of Rwanda in this commemoration?
Yeah. First of all, there is something we do that is not sensitive to distance: praying.
Yeah.
Praying for Rwanda during this period. It is a very trying period. People are usually taken back to those 100 days. Many of the survivors end up reliving the trauma they went through. And it is really a period where we need massive presence of God to prevent us from being downcast and being very much affected by that remembrance. That is one thing you can do. The other thing, we have even Rwandan communities in the US. In many towns or cities, Rwandans organize commemoration. They are definitely encouraged when they see their friends, American friends, joining them. Probably what you can do, you can even contact the embassy in Washington, D.C. to give you the programs, usually they know when such community in Colorado Springs or Los Angeles or Michigan, when they will be celebrating commemorating the genocide.
Okay.
And you can join them. But the thing you can do, which I believe has a great efficacy, is praying. As the Bible tells us that Elijah was a man like us, and he prayed for the rain to stop for 3.5 years, and the rain stopped. And he prayed again, and the rain came. So prayers can command even a natural phenomenon. So we can, by prayer, command our emotions to be quiet and peaceful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that encouragement, and just encourage anybody that's listening today to join the Rwandan people in prayer. Pray for them, pray with them, and then as Ambassador suggested, reach out to your community, reach out to the governmental offices of Rwanda in the United States and see if there's not something that you can join. Thank you very much. I do hope you'll join me again sometime. I've got so much more I want to ask you, and I just appreciate you and our friendship. And thanks for modeling what it looks like to finish strong. So well done. Thanks.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to just have a conversation with you and with the listeners when they get to listen to it.
Okay. Thanks to Ambassador Murigande, and for all of you for joining us. You can get a link to his bio in our show notes, and I'm hopeful he will join us again so we can unpack some of these crazy, fascinating stories. Our next Finishing Strong weekend is going to be held in Colorado in August, and then we're going to return to Rwanda in October of this year. If you or someone else you know would be interested in hosting a Finishing Strong weekend, just reach out to us through our website.